Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we've got a good show for you this week. Not too much action going on with the Ducks, but some news about Corey Perry, Silfverberg, and some of the other players that we'll talk about. We'll also talk about Frederik Andersen, and some news going on with the stadium as well as the season approaches. The news that first came out this week, Eddie, was Corey Perry now joins the World Cup of Hockey tournament as the 10th Duck player to be in the tournament, as he's going to get ready for Team Canada and play for them, and we'll see how he does. But now we've got all the big guys playing for Anaheim, so it should be a good tournament in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, every week we seem to update and saying more and more of the core seems to be going to the tournament. And last week it was Raquel, before that it was Lindholm, and now it's Perry. So I mean, I don't think there's anybody else that could get invited. I think we're at the limit right now of guys that could go. So I mean, it's exciting, and it'll be nice to see, obviously, him go. I think we all thought he deserved to go when the roster was initially announced. So it's nice to see him be able to go now and obviously play with Getzlaf there, and then to see the rest of these guys, Silfverberg and Raquel and Lindholm and Gibson and Vaughn and Kessler, and see all of them play during the tournament. But I mean, it is still worrying to now have another guy to worry about that could possibly get injured at the tournament, and to have the core, the core centerpieces of your team throughout going to this tournament and risking injury. I mean, we're going to move into it in a little bit, but we saw Andersen get injured in an Olympic qualifier, and that wasn't even part of the tournament. You still have the tournament coming up, so there's always a chance for that. So obviously it's exciting, but it's nerve-wracking at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I mean, the Ducks have 10 players in there, all key players in the Ducks lineup, offense, in net, defense, everything, big name players. Obviously, a couple players that still need to be resigned, which we'll get to some more fan questions about Raquel and Lindholm later in the show. But, the injuries is the biggest concern for me, Eddie. And like you mentioned, Andersen was injured. We put it out there on Twitter. We retweeted Alex Nunn. He had the GIF video of the incident, and it looked pretty bad. I mean, there's a collision in the net. You see Andersen lands on his shoulder. We actually got the update today from Darren Dreger saying that he's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks, and it looks like maybe he'll be ready. According to the team, he'll be ready come the season. But kind of a worrisome thing there, Eddie. I mean, it was a big collision, and he hit the ice pretty hard there.
Yeah, and I think the most disappointing thing is, at least for Leafs fans, and I guess for obviously for fans of Freddie and who people who wanted to do well in Toronto, it wasn't a game that really didn't matter. I mean, obviously it mattered to the two countries playing, and it was a qualifiers for the Olympics, but in a game that really has no impact on the season, and it had nothing to do with the World Cup of Hockey. It's a blow for Team Europe. It's a blow especially for the Leafs if he's not ready or he's not 100% come the start of the season. I mean, yes, they did sign Enroth, but the reason they made this trade was they were hoping that Freddie would start 60 games for them this season. So they're obviously hoping that he'll be ready to go. It's disappointing, like I said, to see that happen in a game, that has nothing to do with the NHL or has nothing to do even with the World Cup of Hockey. But, injuries happen, and I think they just have to be lucky that it wasn't anything worse and that it is only 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you on there, because as soon as the injury news came out, of course, everybody was chiming in, glad we traded him, and, glad this and that happened. But I just hope that he is fine, and that, even though he's on Toronto, I know he's not a Duck anymore, I still wish him well, and hopefully everything will be okay. And, according to Babcock and Toronto, it seems like things will be all right. So, with that, he'll be out of the tournament. The Ducks will still have their 10 players in there. The action will be coming up, and obviously the next podcast we'll be talking a lot more about the World Cup of Hockey as it unfolds, and some other news too that happened with the Ducks this last week. A few things came out towards the end of the week, more of a minor thing, but something that a lot of fans are concerned about, Eddie, is the Wild Wingers Kids Club they announced that Jakob Silfverberg is the captain of this club that they do every year. They do events, obviously for the kids in Anaheim and Orange County area. And everybody's worried about the curse, Eddie, because we knew what happened with Patrick Maroon last year. He got traded. We've seen other people get traded. So now that's the concern with amongst the fans is Jakob Silfverberg going to get traded? I don't think so, Eddie. I mean, I know he's named the captain, but I really think he'll break that curse. And I'm pretty sure he'll. I hope that he stays with the Ducks this season and years to come.
Yeah, I mean, if it was Fowler, then you'd have some issues to worry if it was Dupre or Stoner. But I mean, the Ducks need forwards, and especially they need forwards who can score goals. And Silfverberg is one of the few that we have on this roster that is a guaranteed 20 goal scorer right now. So I don't think there's any chance that he leaves, especially this season. I mean, he's 25 and he's signed for the next 3 seasons. So I don't think anybody really has to worry. I think the curse will probably end here. But I mean, if he gets traded, then I think we have to worry about there actually being a curse if whoever gets named to the captain next after this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if that does happen, here's some ideas. I think the Ducks should just put Wild Wing as the captain. I mean, it is the Wild Wingers Kids Club. Put in him. He's not going to get traded. We know that. Or, maybe pick a retired guy like, Teemu Selanne or something. I mean, something like that maybe is what the Ducks should consider doing moving forward, Eddie, because we know that those players and the mascot obviously won't get traded.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the Wild Wing Kids Club. So I mean, it would make sense for Wild Wing to be the mascot or the captain of it, and then you don't have to worry about players getting traded. I mean, it is maybe a bad idea to name fringe players the captain of the Wild Wings Kids Club, as we've seen for the last few seasons, obviously with Maroon and a couple other players. I mean, maybe if you name Getzlaf or Perry about a captain of the club, nobody has to really worry about it because there's no chance of those guys getting traded. So maybe just poor choice of the captain, or if you decide to use Wild Wing or somebody else, you can avoid that.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, we'll see what happens during the season, but I'm pretty hopeful that Jakob will be safe. And that kind of leads us to some of our fan questions. We have a whole lot of fan questions as this Labor Day weekend comes down to an end here, and some of them pertain to Silfverberg. Obviously, with this kids club thing, we talked about the curse already, and we had Garrett and George asking some questions, and they're talking about Silfverberg and what kind of role will he have this season, and how will he do. And I think this goes back to some of our other podcasts that we talked about, Eddie. I think a lot of it really comes down to what Randy Carlyle wants to do with the lineup. If he wants to keep the Kessler line intact with Silfverberg and Caggiano, then I could easily see Silfverberg doing well next season and scoring. I mean, obviously last year he had the breakout, he had the 20 goals. Maybe this season he can get 20 plus and do well again. And I think that's what we got to expect with him. Especially if he stays on that line.
Yeah, and he's played 81 games 2 seasons ago, played the full season last year. Reached the 20 goal plateau for the first time. And I remember at the beginning of last season, we thought, this guy he could reach 30 if he gets the puck on net enough. And I mean, he has such a great shot. If he can find himself in some good positions, he can score a lot of goals. And I know for a bit there he was struggling, and then near the end of the season, that's when he started going, and it finally got to 20. And I still think if he gets put in the right situation. And he can create plays for himself and get in the right areas. I still think he can score 30 goals. I think if you have a release and a shot like he has, I think he has the ability to do that. I think he can definitely reach 20 or more again this season. But there is a real potential there for him still to improve and get closer to the 30 goal mark.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think if they do keep that line together, there is a real chance. There's a real chance he gets 25 to 30 goals this next year. So I'm excited to see what he can do, and I hope that they will keep that line together. And talking about breakout players, I mean, obviously Raquel also had a great season last year as well. Silfverberg did, and we had another question here from Joshua. He asked, who do we think will be the biggest breakout player this year? And it's going to be interesting, Eddie. I wrote an article on the Hockey Writers and just put it out today on Labor Day, and talking about Richie and the expectations. Obviously, he came up last season, played those 33 games, only had 4 points. He did much better in San Diego with his 16 goals down there. So I look for him as one of the players I would think to hopefully have a breakout season. As I talked about in that article too is the lineups are in flux right now. We don't really know what the lineups are going to be. I've seen some people posting things out there saying that, oh, this is going to be the Ducks lineup. Well, it's not true. We don't really know what the lineup's going to be. Like we said, if we assume the Kessler lines together, then we can look at a few things, and maybe we see Richie with Perry and Getzlaf next season, or maybe we see him with Raquel. But even then, that depends on if Carlisle wants to keep the Twins together. So there's a lot up in the air. But I think whatever line Richie is on next season, if he can find some chemistry with that line, continue to play his game, use the size, go to the net, I think he's a guy that can really impress next season and definitely do better at the NHL level.
Yeah, as of right now, as the Ducks lineup is at this point in time, and if they don't add anybody else, then the pressure is gonna be put on him to produce and to score some goals and put up some points and improve on his season from last year. And I think if anybody has the ability and the potential to break out, and especially off his poor season offensively last year, it has to be Richie. I mean, we've seen him produce in the OHL. We've seen him even produce with the goals, and I think he just has to take that step forward now and really show that he can do it at the NHL level. And to be fair, I mean, we had Thomas mention to us earlier today, and that was his first professional season last year. I mean, before last year, he was playing in the Ontario Hockey League, and he stepped up to the AHL and the NHL this year. So it's first professional season. He's getting used to everything, and I think if anybody has room to improve and have a breakout season, I think it would be Richie. Especially because, like you said, he only had the 2 goals and the 2 assists. But we could also expect Shea Theodore, if he does get time. Obviously with the way the defense are right now, he might spend most of his time in the AHL again. But I mean, from what we saw last year in the 19 games that he played, we all assumed that he was ready, and obviously the games that he played in the playoffs as well. I think he's a guy who could definitely have a breakout if he gets some more minutes and can play 30 to 40 games this year. I think he has a real potential to have a Shane Gostisbehere kind of impact like he had with Philadelphia this season. And then I guess lastly, kind of an outside the box one. We haven't seen him play in the NHL yet. I know, especially Phil is really excited to see this guy come up in one of our writers, and Nick Kurdilis. I think there's a good shot that if somebody goes down with injury, I think he could finally get his shot. He's 22 now. Had a pretty decent season for the goals last year. So he's starting to put up some more goals. I think if the Ducks are struggling for goals, there's a good chance that he comes up, and if he can produce, there's a good chance he could stay in the lineup.
Yeah, I agree with both those names that you mentioned. I mean, Shea Theodore, obviously, we saw what happened last season, and I think a lot of this season is going to depend on how the blue line unfolds. I mean, if the Ducks do make a trade, in this next month here and get that other forward that they want, then, we're going to see a lot more of Shea Theodore for sure. Or, if somebody gets injured and goes down, we're going to see Theodore a lot more too. So he's definitely one to keep on the radar for sure that could come up and perform. We saw how well he played on the power play. He's definitely a great two-way player defensively. So I agree with you there. I think it's just a matter of how much ice time is he going to see based upon the Ducks, blue line depth. And the other player you mentioned, Nick Kurdilis, I have a friend that's friends of Nick's, and from what I've heard is Nick has been working out really hard and is really hungry this year. As you said, he's 22. He's not 19, 20, 21, but he's starting to get some years under his belt, and he really thinks that he's going to push and try and make it this year, and he has a good chance. I mean, we talked about the left wing depth of this team, and there's not a lot of it. You look at what the Ducks are trying to do; they still haven't gotten that scoring winger that they wanted. It's going to give Richie a big opportunity, as I mentioned in that Hockey Writers article. But I agree with you. Kurdilis is another guy that could sneak up in there. He didn't have a bad year in San Diego at all. He played well, scored goals, and he could get a legitimate chance. I mean, he had 15 goals in 45 games in San Diego, which, I mean, was only behind a couple people on the entire team. So, yeah, I mean, he's another left winger to keep your eye on, Eddie, and I agree. I think, again, if Richie maybe falters and doesn't perform as well, or maybe there's, again, some kind of injury, obviously we don't hope for that, but I'm just saying if some of these things happen, he's another guy to watch, and he could be with the Ducks next year too.
Yeah, and like you said, it's another left wing, left shot guy that they've been looking for, and obviously that Murray hasn't been able to add through trade like he mentioned before the draft. And with Richie is a guy we would expect to get the first shot out of training camp if no trade is made, and if he fails to live up to that, I think Cordelis can get a shot for sure. And it's nice to have these guys. To be able to come up, I think a lot of us would like to see them come up. Obviously, them trading for a top six winger would be beneficial to the timeline that the Ducks are looking at right now. But it's never a bad idea to give some of these guys a shot because they could come up and you never know what they could do.
And you talk about trading as well, and we've had obviously a few more fan questions every week. We get questions about pretty much Lindholm and Raquel and whether or not we're going to make a trade. Those are the top two questions, which is understandable. We totally get that. So talking about the trading situation, because that would affect Richie's playing time, and if Cordelis or Theodore, it really affects all these guys, especially in San Diego, for guys that are fighting to come up. If we look at what's out there right now, and we've mentioned this before, Eddie, it's really, really slim pickings. I don't really see a lot out there. The one team that you and I talked about really is the Rangers. That's the team that they've got all their forwards signed. They could maybe trade a Kreider or something like that, and the Ducks, maybe could give Fowler in a draft pick or another defenseman in a draft pick. I don't know, but in terms of the Ducks doing anything, that's really the only team I look at. I don't know if you have any other teams out there in mind, Eddie, but it's tough, slim pickings out there.
Yeah, and if you look at most of the teams, most of them have 12 or 13 or 14 forwards signed, and that's usually what you like to sit around. The Rangers have 15, and the only other team higher than them are the Winnipeg Jets, and most of their forwards are the young prospects they're expecting to come up and play, or older guys in their late 20s and 30s who are more bottom six guys. So looking for a trade there, it isn't the best option. There isn't a left wing like left shot since Andrew Ladd left that the Ducks could really look at. So it kind of leaves you with the New York Rangers, and they've had issues with their defense in the past. There are rumors that they're trying to move Mark Stahl and move Dan Girardi. And they're kind of looking for that guy to fill the rest of their top four to play with those two guys and Ryan McDonagh. And Fowler's been mentioned there before. Obviously, there was rumors with Detroit. Now with their cap situation, New York looks like the team that it could happen with. They have nobody else to sign this year. They have only about $1.4 million in cap space, but it's enough to make a deal happen. And would they want to move Kreider or Zuccarello? That remains to be seen. But those are the two players you would expect the Ducks to be looking at if they're looking for that top line or top six left winger. And doesn't mean a deal is going to happen. I don't think so. No, it's a possibility. It doesn't look like Rick Nash is moving anymore. So then you've got three guys that are going to play on that left side. That you're gonna have to either move a guy to his off wing. If you're not going to play all three of them. So there's a potential there. It is late in the season now, and it does something like this happen right now, it remains to be seen. But I think if any trade is going to happen, the most likely destination, and obviously Murray can throw a curveball out of nowhere, but I think the most likely destination right now would definitely be the New York Rangers.
And that leads us to more questions about trading. We had Kelly asks about Fowler and, what's going on with the situation. And obviously there's no real update. As we talked about before, the trade talks are very high in the draft. And, Anaheim had been talking to Buffalo, trying to trade up, and some other teams as well, and things didn't work out. So I don't really think much is going to happen, like you said. I think Fowler's still one of them. I think Dupre is another one possibly that could be moved, but I just think it's really tough right now for the Ducks to try and do anything. I do think maybe the World Cup could have some kind of impact. We've seen players. Obviously, we mentioned Anderson getting injured. There's other players that aren't playing because they're already injured. I don't see a great potential out there other than New York, as you mentioned, but it's, things can happen this next couple of weeks during the World Cup, and maybe the Ducks do try and move, Fowler to Prietti. That's what I would kind of think that's going to happen. I don't otherwise see anything really materializing.
Yeah, and from what you've seen, it looks like Murray is comfortable with the fact that if he had to go into the season with Fowler and Vaughn and most likely Lindholm and Bieksa and Dupre and Manson as his top six, and then obviously Stoner and Holzer being the 7 and 8 guy, and that would push Theodore down to the AHL. And I think he's comfortable going into the season like that, obviously. And we've heard this from him, and he's made this public that he would like to acquire that top six defenseman, and that obviously right now having 8 defensemen isn't the best situation, but he is comfortable going into the season with 7 or 8 defensemen. So that is a possibility, and that's something that you could see, and it would be nice for the Ducks to add another forward. I think it would help them, but these deals take time, and both teams have to agree on something that's going to work for both of them. And right now, as we've mentioned, there's not a lot of options from us looking, from the outside. Obviously, the Rangers are the one that makes sense right now. Toronto is still a possibility, but I'm sure they've explored the idea of a James Van Riemsdyk for Fowler deal, and you would have thought if something was going to happen, it would have happened by now. But I think he's comfortable giving some of these young guys a shot, giving Richie, giving Cordelis, giving Nason a shot, and seeing how they can do. And if by the trade deadline, or even before the trade deadline, if it's not working out, then maybe then you can decide to make a trade. Teams are always going to be interested in Fowler, and I think if you don't do it then you might be able to make a trade later on in the season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think later on in the season is kind of the route we're going, and of course, part of this whole thing hinges on Raquel and Lindholm, which of course, we have a lot of fan questions about both those players again. A lot of people asking about if there's any updates or what's going on, and there really isn't, unfortunately. I mean, it's the same as it was last week. I mean, the latest that I heard from people at the Ducks is that they think Raquel is more likely to be signed first as opposed to Lindholm. Obviously, Raquel's deal is most likely not going to be worth as much as Lindholm's. Might be a shorter deal and less per year, or both. But that's kind of where it's at. And they're both, going to the World Cup of Hockey now to play, along with Silfverberg for Team Sweden. And that's another concern is some of the fans have asked us about injuries and also whether or not, them playing can affect their contract. And, I don't really think it's going to affect it too much. I mean, it could a little bit if they both really shine and play very well. It could, but I mean, the talks have already been ongoing. So, I don't think it's going to affect it too much. I think the biggest thing for both these guys is we just want them to stay healthy through this tournament, Eddie. That way, there's no ramifications hurting the Ducks come the NHL season.
Yeah, and you got to look at it this way. They're not the only players going into the World Cup of Hockey without a contract. Obviously, some bigger names even than them, and Johnny Gaudreau and Nikita Kucherov are both going into the tournament without contracts. You also have Rasmus Ristolainen, who's going to be going to the tournament as well, who doesn't have a contract. So there are other players in similar situations that will be going and don't have contracts signed yet. I think it's a different situation this year with the World Cup of Hockey being right now and with the players wanting to just prepare for that and be ready for that tournament, that they're not ready to engage in discussions right now when they're about to go play in the tournament, which is understandable, and I think it will push things back. Obviously, that's not the ideal situation for the GM and the team, but you have to take that into consideration when you're looking at the timeline right now and how long it's taking. So, we might not even see anything happen until the World Cup of Hockey. At least in the meantime, we will have some hockey to watch and be able to watch something while we're waiting for some news to come out. But, if a deal isn't signed before the tournament, I highly doubt it will be signed during the tournament. So it might be something you have to wait until, until early October and before anything is announced.
And that's just crazy that we're talking about it like this now, Eddie. I mean, we thought that both of these deals would be done, the end of August, maybe the beginning of September, and now here we are going into the World Cup of Hockey. And I mean, both these deals may not be done until, a week or two before the season or a few days. I mean, this is some crazy stuff. I mean, the NHL, season's right around the corner. I mean, I'm not saying it's time to panic or anything like that. I mean, obviously they're going to be playing and keeping their skills up and whatnot. But, I'm just a little bit surprised. I really thought, if not both, at least one of these guys, Eddie, would have been signed already.
Yeah, it is surprising. I mean, we talked about earlier how it's kind of similar to the Silfverberg situation, that it went later in August and we'd expect it then. And I think we've continually pushed it back and said, well, I mean, we would hope it would be soon. We'd expect something to happen. And now that we're so close to the World Cup of Hockey right now, you would hope that something would be worked out at least with one of them before the tournament. But, a lot of the news not coming out. We haven't heard much from Raquel and Lindholm, and I don't know if it has to do with them being in Anaheim and with the media coverage being more focused on the two big names in Johnny Gaudreau and Nikita Kucherov. But from what you've heard lately from those two is they're fine going into the tournament without a contract. And the negotiations are ongoing, but Goodrow has said that he would like to just focus on the tournament and not deal with any of that right now, and they'll worry about it come the start of the season. And from what we've heard recently, as well as the Kucherov is okay doing the exact same thing. So with the tournament being less than about a week or two away still, if nothing's announced by then, you're looking at a little bit too close to the start of the season for comfort for any of these guys to get a contract signed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, if something doesn't happen in this next time before the World Cup, then like you said, Raquel Lindholm maybe like the other guys, and they want to focus on the tournament, and we may not hear anything till the beginning of October. I know that's not the answer everybody out there wants to hear, but I mean, I really hope that they get at least one of these guys to be worked out before then. But it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen, because once that tournament starts, I think, like you said, they're going to be focused. Plus, you saw the photo that we tweeted out from one of the Swedish news sites. They're already over there, practicing doing their thing. So, that's what makes it, to me, think, Eddie, that it's going to be less something's going to get done, because they're already engaged in skating, and as all the news has come out today, they showed Perry practicing today, Getzlaf as well, Team Canada. You got all the other players doing their thing this week. So I don't really think something's going to happen. I mean, I really hope so, but this is kind of nerve-wracking. I mean, it's something that like we talked about, it's kind of holding up anything else if the Ducks are going to make a trade or get somebody else.
And just because they are at the tournament, you have to look at it this way too, doesn't mean that a deal can't be worked out. The deal obviously is discussed between the player, the agent, and the general manager. So the player doesn't have to be present necessarily for the deal to be made. I'm sure they're in contact still with their agent, and then their agent is in contact with the general manager, and I'm sure deals and everything are still being worked out. So there is still a chance that something could happen before the tournament starts. I'm sure discussions are going to be ongoing until it does start, especially between the agent of Raquel Lindholm and Bob Murray. But yeah, I mean, it is an interesting situation with the World Cup of Hockey being so close, and you're not used to having a tournament this close to the start of the season. So normally you'd be like, oh, okay, we have this amount of time before the season starts. It's just training camp. It's just preseason. They'll be in Anaheim. We're able to have the player present and work on a deal. Well, it's a little bit different situation this year where they're going to be focusing on a tournament. And the once that tournament starts, it's really, really unlikely that a deal would be announced during the tournament and distract the player away from it. So it's a weird situation, and hopefully we finally get at least one of them signed before the tournament starts, and they kind of relieve the pressure a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you, and you make a good point. I mean, obviously something can be done with them not here. I mean, obviously the player agents have a huge role in this with the GM, so that's something that we're going to have to watch over this next week and a half or so before the tournament. And it leads into another question that we had from Noah. He asks about this coming up season, as far as the pieces that the Ducks have in their lineup, and if they can go the distance to win the Stanley Cup. And I mean, it's difficult. I have another article that I'm writing actually about this that's going to come out on Hockey Writers 2 later this week. And it's just difficult right now, Eddie, because the same situation. We don't have Raquel and Lindholm nailed down. I mean, I think they will get the deals done and stay in Anaheim. I'm pretty hopeful of that. That's just my own opinion. Is no information. That's just what I think will happen. But as far as this upcoming season and the way that the Ducks are going to approach it, there's a lot of variables coming up this season. You have what's old is new, as I call it, is Randy Carlyle's back. The line combinations, like we said earlier in the show, we don't know. They could be all over the place. And if the Ducks get another player somehow, then they're going to change again. So it's going to be an interesting season for sure. I think the Ducks are a good team. I think we talked about the Pacific Division last week and previewed it. We think they're still going to be up there battling it out with San Jose and LA, most likely for the top of the division. But as far as going the distance and winning the Stanley Cup, I don't think their chances are as good as they were the last 4 years. I mean, they brought in a few players, but they also lost some. Perron and McGinn are the two big ones, and to my mind, that were unfortunate because they could have been 20 goal scorers. But it's going to be difficult. Like I said, I think they'll do well, but unless some things get straightened out as far as the chemistry with the lines, Carlisle's coaching, there's just a lot up in the air, Eddie. I think it's going to be a fun season, but it's going to be nerve wracking, with what the current roster is right now.
Yeah, and they still, like we've mentioned before, especially last week when we talked about the Pacific Division, the core is still there. This team is still going to be competitive, but on paper right now, are they better than they were last year? I think most of us can agree that they aren't. And where we got worse, a lot of teams got better. San Jose got better. They improved from where they were last year. Dallas got better. They added Yuri Hudler. They're gonna have Sagan healthy for the whole season, hopefully for them. St. Louis is going to be good again. Chicago's obviously going to be good again. LA maybe got a little bit worse, but they're still going to be up there. And then the teams in the bottom, Nashville is going to be interesting to see how they work with adding Subban. We'll see how Boudreau does with Minnesota as well. Colorado has a new coach. Winnipeg, we'll see how they do with Patrick Laine, and obviously they've signed Scheifele long term, so that will help them out there. And Calgary and Edmonton, it's going to be interesting to see how they do, especially like McDavid, full season McDavid for Edmonton. It's going to be tough. I mean, a lot of people improved, and the Ducks right now are sitting in a worse spot than they were at the beginning of last season. So I think they can still make the playoffs, but it's going to be a lot tougher than it was.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And I think one of the biggest concerns we have to look at, Eddie, is it's really the offense. I mean, obviously the Ducks did well on the special teams last year. They were first in both of those. The defense was, outstanding. Obviously with Gibson and Anderson, they gave up the league lowest 188 goals. So I mean, you have those two aspects that are great. Randy Carlisle focuses on faceoffs and defense and special teams. So I think the Ducks are going to be good in all those areas. I'm just really concerned about the forecheck, and that's what I want to see because this lineup that you have. I mean, if you keep the Kessler line together, you're still going to have three other lines that are not really the same. I mean, you could keep Perry and Getzlaf together and you add one more guy, okay. But I mean, it's still going to be up in the air. There's just too many variables right now in my mind. And I think that the Ducks are going to have to work out a lot of these kinks in the preseason. And unfortunately, I think in the month of October and November, too, to get the lines down, the chemistry down. And I'm just really hoping that we don't have this horrific scoring drought in the first couple months because I think with this team, if that happens, I think digging out of it, Eddie, is going to be even more difficult than with the team they had last year.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see a lot of tight games unless somebody really impresses. I think we're going to be relying on Corey Perry a lot more than we did even last year. I think he's going to have to not he can't have a start like he did last year. It can't happen this year with the lack of scoring depth that we have. Silfverberg is going to have to get going. When Raquel gets signed, he's going to have to get going. They're going to have to improve on the 20 goals they had last year, and you're going to have to get goals from depth in the lineup. You're going to have to get goals from Cogliano. Getzlaf is going to have to not have the slump that he had last year, and hope that he gets close to 15 or 20 this year, and that's going to be something that helps out. Kessler as well. You're gonna have to get goals from all across the whole lineup. It's not like we're gonna rely on one or two guys to score 40 or 50 goals. It's not like you're gonna expect, like in Chicago, you're gonna expect Kane and Hossa or Kane and Panarin to score like 20 or like 30, 40 goals, 50 goals in a season. You're gonna have to get goals from across the lineup, especially if we don't add anybody else. And people are gonna have to impress. Some of the new guys, Vermette and Raymond and some of the younger guys and Richie and what we talked about with Nason as well, they're going to have to come up and contribute to the lineup too. And if we can get, 3, 4, 5 guys who score at least 20 goals this season, I think we'll be okay. But, there's no way that the key guys, especially Perry and Silfverberg, and Raquel can struggle at the beginning of the season, or like you said, we're going to have a goal drought and it's going to be similar to the start of last season.
Yeah, I think you touched on a good point there, Eddie, about the secondary scoring. I mean, if you look at this team, like you said, besides Perry, Getzlaf, and Kessler, You look at Silverberg and Raquel, they're going to have to do well again. And then after that, I mean, like you said, you have Cogliano, Vermette, Garbett, Raymond, and, Wagner too. I mean, we've seen Wagner, obviously, he usually plays on that fourth line role, but I mean, he popped a few goals when he was in Colorado. He's going to have to start doing that too in Anaheim as well. And like you said, this team is going to have to produce all four lines. They're really going to have to try and score, which it's going to be difficult because I know Carlisle likes to have his, fourth line, kind of the grinding type line. So, maybe it'll be three lines we have to rely on. But, everybody's going to have to provide scoring, like you said. And if the Ducks don't get secondary scoring, you know, we're going to be in for a haul. I mean, we're going to see, Gibson's going to be fine in net. I'm not worried. I know some people are, still concerned about that. And I get it. It's a valid point with Anderson gone. But I think if Gibson plays like he did in the middle of the season and towards the end last year, he's going to be fine. Come playoff time is what we're going to have to worry about with this entire team. But as far as the regular season goes, if we can get a balanced attack from at least three of the lines, then I think we have a really good chance, Eddie.
Yeah, and it's going to most likely be defensive hockey. And obviously, we don't know how Carlisle is going to approach this season and how he's going to coach the team to play. It's the first time in a long time that we're going to have a different style than Boudreau has had, and we might not see as much forecheck. We might see a different style of hockey. But when you just look at the lineup and you look at obviously Getzlaf is one of the best passers in the league. Perry's a creative player for sure, so is Silfverberg and Raquel. But, Kessler, more of a defensive center. Vermette, more of a defensive center. Cogliano's more of a two-way guy. Garbett, Thompson, even Raymond and Wagner. Not a lot of guys who are going to be flashy. We're not going to see, Detroit Red Wings style hockey. We're not going to see up and down the ice quick passes and puck possession. We might not see that as much as we saw it last year. And it might be, it all depends on how the coach approaches to playing with the team that he has, and we'll have to see how that is. I mean, we're going to have to rely on a lot more guys to be creative. I don't think we have to worry about Raquel obviously being creative. He showed that last year that he could do that. Silverberg showed that too in Perry as well. But, it's going to be tough to rely on three or four guys to create most of the offense for the Ducks. So it's like you said, and like we mentioned for the last few minutes, that it's going to be key to get offense from three or if not four lines, and it'll be interesting to see how Carlisle decides to split up. If he decides to split up Getzlaf or Perry, or if he decides to split up the Kessler line and move those creative players up and down the lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the two biggest questions is keeping the Kessler line together. I could see him maybe moving Cogliano around in the lineup, but I would like to at least see Kessler and Silfverberg stay together because they've really done well together. I mean, they did great, 2 years ago in the postseason, and they've done good in the regular season last, year as well. So I'd like to see those two at least stay together. The more complicated one, I guess, would be Getzlaf and Perry because, last season we saw both. We saw them together, and then we saw them playing with all kinds of different people. We saw, Garbett up there playing with them. We saw Stewart up there. We also saw them split. We saw Getzlaf playing with Stewart and Perron, and then we saw Raquel and Perry playing together with McGinn at times. So that's another idea is do you put Perry with Getzlaf or do you put him with Raquel? I think that's something else that's going to be key this season and see what Carlisle does with that because, that could change the lineup dramatically depending on which way you go, Eddie. And then you got to figure out what the rest of the forwards, if you put Raquel and Perry together, that's fine. But then you're going to have to figure out who you're going to put with Getzlaf because, Perron and Stewart are gone.
Yeah, and really, I think you start the season with them together and you see how it works out. I mean, the reason they were split up last year is because we were getting no offense and they were too predictable, and you could shut down Getzlaf and Perry in that line, and there was no offense coming from the rest of the lineup. And the moment we split them up, from there on, you were getting offense from Getzlaf's line, which was a threat. You were having to deal with Kessler's line, which was a threat, and then you were having to deal with Raquel and Perry, which was a threat. So having those three lines, and we mentioned this, I don't know, countless times last year, how many teams had nightmares matching up against the Ducks because you had to match against three lines with, superstars on each line almost, with Getzlaf on one line and Kessler on another line and Perry on another line. But I think it would be good to start them together at the beginning of the season and see how it works out and how it works out in the new style. I think it'll be ideal for Perry to start with Getzlaf and hope that he can start out strong at the beginning of the season and that it works out. But if they're having issues again, I'm not opposed to breaking them up. But like you mentioned, who plays with Getzlaf then? If you play Raquel with Perry, there's no, you could move Silfverberg up there, but there's no real guys who can complement Getzlaf other than Silfverberg. So it's an interesting situation to be in, obviously with no Perron and no McGinn and no Stewart this year. So some guys are going to have to fill the role if they end up splitting up the Twins.
Yeah, and I think for the fans, you're just going to have to hang on. I think, October, November, it's going to be interesting. I hope it's better than last year, but, it's a little bit of nervous time. And it's going to be interesting to see how the team comes out in the beginning. Obviously, the World Cup plays a factor into that, as we've talked throughout the show. And, we're going to have to be out there and doing our best as well. And it kind of leads to our last fan question, which is kind of interesting because it's a fan question about the fans from Greg. And he asks, do the Anaheim fans, get underappreciated? Basically, compared to Canadian fans or East Coast fans and also the players. And I think it's an interesting question because he also references Hiller, and we all know about the comments he made to Eddie. And, in the conversations I've had with the players and whatnot, I don't, and the people at the Ducks, I don't think the fans are underappreciated at all. I don't really think that's the case in terms of how we are when we're there and we're interacting and doing the things that we are. I think the team knows about the fans and appreciates it. I think it's just a different fan base. I mean, you look at where you're at in Toronto, the fans are, they're nuts over hockey up there. I mean, Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg, I mean, all those places, Chicago, those types of cities, they're just really into their hockey up there. And I think that's just really the difference, Eddie. I don't know if the fans are underappreciated, but I think the fans are a little bit different, especially with, so much that Southern California has to offer.
Yeah, and that's where you're right on with it being a different type of fan base. There with the Ducks, you have, from what I've noticed from outside, you have the core fans where they're dedicated, and then you have it kind of dissipates from there where there are people who are fans, and there's nothing wrong with it, but they're not 100% just hockey. There's and that's the same in any fan base, but it's like a small group dedicated to the fan base, and then it kind of dissipates from there where you look at Toronto or Montreal, and it's just years and years and years of history and people growing up and being Leafs fans from their family and being Habs fans from their family, and just the history behind it, and this is a different type of feeling to it, and there's nothing wrong with it. Obviously, the Ducks are a younger team, and over the time when when the Ducks franchise is 100 years old, we'll have all the history and everything, and it will be similar. But right now with a younger fan base, it's definitely different, and I don't think it's underappreciated from up here. There's actually surprisingly, there's a lot of Ducks fans up here, and that might be because they're a newer team, and a lot probably has to do with Disney and the Mighty Ducks and everything like that. But I don't think they're underappreciated. I think like you said, it is just a different type of fan base. It's a different hockey market, so it's not the exact same situation. But I think they appreciate the fans, and I think more so it's a more dedicated fan base than you would see almost anywhere else. It's got to be the same, obviously, in LA and San Jose as well, and any of those markets, even in the Florida markets as well, where hockey isn't number one, but the fans who do show up and do buy season tickets and do attend the games and everything like that, it's a more dedicated fan base because it's such a smaller, close knit compared to like the wide fan base of like say the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, there are, hardcore, diehard fans like you and I, and there's a whole bunch of others. I mean, I talk to them all the time. Obviously, there's Facebook groups on there that, we have a lot of fans in there. And, I think part of it is the media too, because, in Canada, the media is really on the hockey players. So I think that's part of it. That's a difference too. And, in Southern California, there's so much going on down here. You've got three baseball teams. You now have 2 football teams with the Rams back, so you've got that going on. You've got basketball with the Lakers and the Clippers, so you got all this stuff going on down here. And it's nothing against Canada, but I mean, Canada doesn't. Some of the cities have baseball or basketball or whatever, but they don't have all. I mean, we have everything down here. There's everything. If you like a certain sport, I mean, we have soccer too. Like Eddie, I know you're a big soccer fan. We've got that too. So there's a lot of different things that are going on down here. I don't think the fans are underappreciated at all. I know the players are very appreciative of them and everything that they do. I think it's more of a media thing, if anything. I think the players like the fact that the media isn't on them as much down here, if anything. And that to me is really the biggest thing that I hear when I talk to different people, either from the organization or the players, Eddie.
Yeah, and you've heard that from players too. I know I heard in a and in I think it was an interview with Tyler Seguin, he's or maybe even Jamie Benn. They said they like the fact that they can walk down the street in Dallas and people don't swarm them. They'd be like, "Oh, there's the hockey guy," and then if Tony Romo walks down the street, people swarm him because it's a football city.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the difference when you look at the LA market and the California market, and you look at the Canadian sports market as well, is like you mentioned, there's baseball teams, there's multiple baseball teams, there's multiple basketball teams, there's multiple hockey teams, even there's soccer teams, all in this small area in the California market. And then you look at Canada, and there's multiple hockey teams, but not in the same aspect. There's Toronto and Montreal, and there's all the Senators all in the Ontario region. Then it spreads out, but there's one basketball team, and there's one baseball team, and there's a couple soccer teams, and it's all spread out, and it's a little bit different. So the hockey markets are spread out wider than any of the other ones, because there's like I said, there's only one other team for baseball, and there's not a lot as much to focus on. So hockey gets a brunt of the focus, especially during even in the off season. A lot of the Canadian teams get more coverage than anything else because there's not much going on. So you can see it from that aspect, where the fan base is either dedicated to the Ducks, and then it dilutes out because there's so many other sports to follow from there.
Yeah, I agree with you on everything you said. And I think just the one last thing is, I think the players here, at least in some of the conversations I've had, they actually appreciate the fact that the fans aren't, too crazy about it. Like you said, they can go out somewhere and have dinner and not have 500 people go, "Oh, Getzlaf's eating at this restaurant." It's not as crazy like that. So I think that they like the fact that the fans are into hockey here, but that they're not, overly into it. So that's what I've heard from some of the guys. And I think the base of our fans has been good, and I think it's strong, and I think it's going to keep growing, like you said, as time goes on and we have, more seasons under the belt. It's just going to continue to grow. And obviously the Ducks have been doing well, ever since winning the Stanley Cup. We've had great seasons. We just haven't won the cup again. So I think that's what we're, most concerned about, is hopefully they can get back there and win it. And like I said, I'll have an article coming out in a couple of days talking about that as well. And with that, there's really not too much more going on. The Ducks did get, the new fresh sheet of ice out there. They were out there painting. Some of our friends were out there doing the red line and the blue lines. So there's some of the photos out there that the Ducks posted and then we reposted with the proper credit and everything, Eddie. And we made sure that that's out there for you. And the Ducks Diehards kit's coming up soon too as well. It looks like Corey Perry is going to be the bobblehead there. You're going to be able to get several other players, Getzlaf and Kessler, during the regular season as well. So they're going to have that coming up. And not this week, but next week we'll start our contest where we're going to give away tickets to opening night. So look for that. And we'll talk about all the details next week. And, hopefully when we come back next week, we'll, preview the World Cup of Hockey, and, maybe we'll have a move or two, Eddie. But until then, I hope you had a good holiday weekend, those of you celebrating Labor Day. And we'll see you next week. Let's go Ducks.